Zakara was a teaching assistant for an Indigenous Studies field course with Dr. Desmond Moser and Professor Clint Jacobs, exploring invasive plant removal, replanting, and land healing. Here she found a love for land restoration with a specific focus on employing Indigenous knowledge and techniques to do so. She has been a teaching assistant in an Indigenous Studies course at Western University with Dr. Desmond Moser and Clint Jacobs as course instructors. In this presentation, Zakara will present an overview of some student projects, reflections, and share the progress they have made on land restoration and invasive plant removal at the Spencer Tract, highlighting Clint's Indigenous teaching and Dr. Moser's expertise in Canadian invasive plant species. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Zakara.
Hello. All right, let me share my screen here. All right, can we see this okay? Okay.
Can see it.
So today my presentation is titled An Indigenous Approach, Land Healing and Reciprocity with Western Students. Today I'm going to take you through an introduction of what we did, a brief course description. I'm going to talk about some importance of action. I'll be highlighting some notable student projects, and finally a brief summary.
We're getting a lot of feedback. I'm just wondering, do you want to turn on and off your speaker again, your microphone?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Much.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, my name is Zakara Stampp, and like she did a wonderful introduction already, but I am a PhD student and research fellow at Western University, and my supervisor is Dr. Jason Gilliland, and I'm currently working on the quarantining project, where we work to understand the impacts of physical distancing on the health and habits of teens. This is a slight pivot from the research I'm going to be presenting today, which is why I thought it was interesting to bring up. So in the fall 2022 semester, I was the TA of a dual course, a blend between geography and environment, as well as Indigenous studies, which was something new for me. Here with Dr. Desmond Moser and Professor Clint Jacobs, we took on 6 weeks of land healing and restoration with a group of students. Dr. Moser is a professor and Department of Earth Sciences chair at Western University. And instructor Clint is the Walpole Island Heritage Center's Natural Heritage Coordinator and President of the Walpole Island Land Trust. He hails from Walpole Island First Nation and is a respected member of the community. He brings his traditional knowledge to the table and shares with students his Indigenous perspectives on reciprocity, restoration, invasive plant species remediation, land stewardship, and connections to, as well as responsibilities to, land and water. So while the weather allowed us, every Friday morning we would meet the students at Ross Park, pictured on the far left there, and we would walk the trail to our restoration site along the Spencer Tract. And there's a photo of the Dr. Moser and some students walking into our restoration site. We worked to heal the land by removing invasive non-native plant species, such as crown vetch, and we replanted some traditional native plants, including nodding wild onion, for example. When we did this, we really focused on supporting the native plants' continued growth. So as we replanted, we would continue feeding and supporting our old plants. Here you can see a photo of the lower restoration site and the students working on it. And you can see them learning about the various medicinal, traditional, and Indigenous uses of plants, learned from instructor Jacobs and Ron Sands, an additional Indigenous knowledge keeper from Walpole Island. We continuously work to connect with the land and give thanks for its offerings. And at the end of the course, we held a traditional corn soup feast, and we set a bowl out for the land to give thanks for its tolerance of our presence. Here we have a list of all of the Indigenous non-invasive plants we restored and planted into our restoration site, including big blue stem, purple turtlehead, rough leaf goldenrod, and sky blue aster. Throughout this process, Dr. Moser broadened student knowledge of invasive plant species, while Instructor Jacob was broadening knowledge of traditional Indigenous plants and techniques to continue land healing, even outside of the bounds of the Spencer Tract. Each student chose an individual project, and within the scope of the course philosophy and community needs identified by members of Walpole Island Heritage Center, with a focus on some aspect of land restoration or cultural protocol with an ethic of reciprocity. Here we have a quote by Ron Sands. During the time he spent with us at the restoration site, he would start each morning with a reminder. Take a moment to yourself, close your eyes, and give thanks to the land before we enter and start our work. This way, the students could set positive intentions with the restorative work that week and reflect on what had been done the previous week. This was a very emotional process, and as the weeks progressed, the students tended to be more and more invested in the land stewardship that took place with Ron and with Instructor Clint. So what? An important part of this course was simply knowledge distribution. Many of these students didn't know what invasive plant species were, nor could they identify one and the associated dangers they present to Canadian ecosystems. On a larger scale, we were able to share Indigenous knowledge, ways of living, and land restoration techniques directly from the source, a respected individual of the Indigenous community. These students truly gained a grasp of invasive plant knowledge, and this was demonstrated in their final course projects. Most importantly, Indigenous agriculture is important for building sustainable environments, and this is important to recognize as we move forward. Invasive plants can be very dangerous to Canadian ecosystems, as they are the second most significant threat to Canadian biodiversity. Plants such as giant hogweed are aggressive and resilient to the point where they outcompete the native plants. This was a problem that we saw firsthand at the restoration sites. We would spend hours doing removal just to come back the next week and find little sweet clover sprouts pushing through the freshly turned dirt. This taught our students the importance of proper removal, as the invasive plant species had complex root systems which were slowly encroaching on our freshly planted native species. Indigenous agriculture techniques are important to follow as they provide proven, historical, generational knowledge that is effective. These are environmentally sustainable methods, such as using a cow urine mixture to combat viral fungus in crops, rather than using dangerous pesticides or chemicals. They promote a wider use of organic crop productivity, and that is something that will be useful as many people are shifting towards organic diets in today's day and age. Finally, it helps to decolonize planetary health education, putting the focus on land and reciprocity between humans and Mother Earth. So for our final projects, the big part of the whole course was a trip to Walpole Island, where we got to experience Indigenous life firsthand while learning about Indigenous agriculture techniques from the elders and employees of the Heritage Center. We ate traditional food, listened to their stories, and took a long walk through their hunting land. Here, Ron and Instructor Clint were able to shine light on the importance of Indigenous techniques and show the students how their land restoration techniques would benefit the environment on a larger scale. At the end of our time together, students were required to put together a final project based on their gifts. Gifts were determined through the semester during field work, through student discussion with me, Dr. Moser, and Instructor Clint, as well as through direct observation of our time spent together. Each project represents the student themselves, while also relating to goals and needs set by the people of Walpole Island. Here we have OG Lazor's final project for the course. They demonstrated where each of the seedlings were planted on our upper level restoration site. OG was able to demonstrate knowledge of Indigenous plants and really took the time to map out where everything was happening over the course of our 6 weeks of fieldwork. There were 2 plots that we worked on, both with their own mixture of Indigenous plants. The lower plot, as seen here, included plants such as big blue stem, blue vervain, bottle brush grass, fringed brome, and little blue stem. At the core of our upper plot was sweetgrass. This was meaningful to the students as Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmer was one of the required readings of the course, and it brought the stories told within to life as they got to work with the plant every Friday. For Sarah's final project, she wrote an essay detailing the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that came up for her while participating in land healing. Through this, she produced a visual representation of how removing invasive plants and restoring with Indigenous ones made her feel. And we have this beautiful piece here to share with you today. This here is page 2 of 3 of Olivia Tom's pamphlet that she created for her final project. Here, she was able to bring attention to Indigenous arts, issues, and cultural values. She also ties in techniques and plant knowledge learned from Ron Sands and instructor Clint, showcasing her knowledge of both invasive and native Canadian plant species. She includes here instructions for harvesting tobacco, sweetgrass, and sage. And this was important to the course, as each morning before entering the restoration site, we would spread tobacco as a cultural ritual to feed and to give back to the land. Here we have Sarah Starvdis, and she is taking her knowledge of invasive plant species and made a plan to take this information home to her parents and repurpose their family gardens. Rather than showcasing the typical non-native plants that might be in a garden, Sarah opted to showcase traditional Indigenous plants that she learned to work with through her fieldwork. This will facilitate further knowledge translation to her parents in the hopes of educating her community on the importance of Indigenous plants in home gardens rather than traditional non-native species. Here we have Tate Vanier, who was so touched by the work that we did in class that he decided to take it upon himself to create a detailed instructional plan for future offerings of this course. He included materials needed for fieldwork, directions to the restoration site, and instructions on effective invasive species removal. Here we have pictured his detailed list of invasive trees and shrubs that future students may come across out in the field so that they know how to identify them by name as they are encountered. Tate puts a focus on removal of specifically invasive plant species as to not harm the native plants who are trying to succeed in their current environment. Finally, we had Seth Edwards, who produced a pamphlet describing how to take on land-based healing using an Indigenous approach. He emphasizes the importance of invasive plant removal while highlighting the importance of creating a positive relationship with the land as you continue to work on it. Relying on the teachings of Clint and Ron, Seth was able to produce a mini guide of how to really connect with the land while reaping the medicinal and agricultural benefits. So in all, the students and course instructors came together with one common goal, and that was to learn about invasive plants in Ontario and to heal the land by relying on Indigenous techniques. This was such a rewarding experience, and we will continue to educate Ontario youth in the hopes of further knowledge distribution and land healing in different contexts through future offerings of this course at Western University. Thank you for listening to the presentation, and my contact email is there if needed. It's been a pleasure presenting to you guys today, and I think this will lead us into our period.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zakara. That was really interesting and just a very different approach. I went to Western biology, and this is a completely different perspective and way of looking at the land, and especially in acknowledging the emotional, how it impacts someone emotionally. It's often something I find that's missing, so that's excellent. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Zakara? So do students get any to follow up on some of the different projects they've been involved with and kind of see its progress?
Yeah, so once you are a part of this course, or once you have an introduction, a formal introduction to the land, you have the right to come back at any time and continue any land healing or continue any type of journey that they started. So once you join the course, you're in it for life. You can come back whenever. You don't have to actively participate, but if you want to do something private and just be at the land, that was allowed.
Excellent. And how many students could participate?
It was a smaller course, so we did have about 15 students at the end. That being said, with the continuous land restoration that we keep doing, we keep having more and more space and more things to do. And so we can see registration for that course increasing soon.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have. Thanks very much, Zakara.
Thank you.
Bye.